Well, welcome to Software Architecture for 2017. We'll see how we do this year. I'll go through several things, including who I am, what the subject is about, how it's taught, what the lectures are, what the tutorials are, and what you do in them. I'll talk about assessments, because everybody wants to know where they get their marks from. And I'll tell you what my experience is of how to get better marks, because obviously having taught it for some time, there are some trends emerge. So let's get started with who am I? Well, I'm Tom McBride. I spent about 25 years in industry up until about 2001. So I span a reasonable amount of the history of computing. And I've seen the emergence of the importance of good design and subsequently good architecture. I do have a research interest in software engineering, specifically engineering rather than software programming. I have been involved in ISO standards. I was involved in ISO standards for, I think it was about 17 years. I stopped that in about 2014 because I spent long enough in it. And I could see the emerging trends out of that. During that time, I was on the periphery of a standard that was being developed for documenting software architectures, and that was being developed by some very bright people. I have taught this subject since 2008, and think, oh wow, 9 years. I do try to keep up with software architecture through meetups, through newsletters, through general information, but more particularly through a newsletter I get each week from InfoQ. And InfoQ has some really good presentations on current architecture concerns, which is the one I look at. They also have presentations on databases, on programming, on essentially the sociology of software engineering. It's a really good source of information, so I do try to keep up through that. Now, about this subject. This subject, as you can read in the subject outline, this subject teaches the basics of software architecture. It teaches what software architecture is and is not. I mean, you can't classify everything as software architecture, so there's some things that do become software architecture and other parts that are not really software architecture. We'll deal with the processes of developing a software architecture, where there are things that you can do, and if you do them, you'll actually come out with a reasonable software architecture. By the end of this subject, you should be capable of developing a sound software architecture for a small to medium application. That's the minimum aim for this subject, is that you can actually do something. You should be capable of assisting an experienced software architecture and be actually used to them. You should understand what software architecture does and its role in software development. This subject does not try to teach advanced topics in software architecture. This is intended to be an introduction to software architecture, to take you away from just hacking around with programming. This will now teach you designing programs and systems of programs before you start coding it. Okay, so that's what it's intended to do, and as I say, it's an introduction, not intended to be advanced topics. If you want advanced topics, then I can recommend some of Dr. Asif Gill's lectures. He does more there. This subject doesn't necessarily assume that you know about programming. All right? If you don't know about programming, there are some courses on lynda.com, which is available through the UTS library, and I recommend you do those.